Hey there, you're listening to the Not So Breakfast Show with Sasha and Ish. Alright, welcome to Not So Breakfast Show today, and we have got an excellent episode for you. This is an interview with our friend and colleague Chris Waugh, and we haven't all worked together for 20 years, so there's a little bit of reminiscing about that, but Chris is doing some unique and amazing things in the teaching profession. Also, this happens to Sash.
And that snort was free. You don't edit that snort out. That's a powerful emotional snort.
And I definitely didn't edit it out. So you're going to love this episode. Let's get it. Alright, welcome to the Not So Breakfast Show today, and this is the one where we get to introduce Chris Waugh. I'll leave the official introduction up to Sasha. I'll just say teacher, podcaster, and rebel educator, one of the terms I learnt today, which was pretty exciting. And I actually feel like I've been talking to Chris all day because I've been listening to his podcast and watching his documentary this afternoon, so it is great to have you on the show. Chris, thank you very much.
I'm very happy to be here. Kia ora.
Cool. And Sasha, where are you beaming in from today?
I'm coming from Christchurch.
Oh, we're in the same town, Sasha. Nice.
I know. I was going to say I'm coming from my bed because I was at work and at about 2:00 I just could not keep my eyes open. I thought I have to have a wee nap. So I've literally just sprung from my power nap to be with you guys.
Oh.
I heard a technique for a nap called a nappuccino. And so you basically have a little shot of coffee just before you go to sleep. You have a wee nap and then you wake up fully charged, apparently.
It sounds like the kind of variety of coffee you sell, Sasha.
I'm going to have to try that. I'm going to try that soon.
It'll be the next one, won't it? You have these little sleeping pods in each cafe.
I love it, and I especially love that we have you with us today, Chris. You and I, and obviously we go back hundreds of years, but I'm not so interested in when I first met you for your official introduction. For your official introduction, let's highlight the fact that you've been teaching in the secondary school system for about 20 years now, and that has really varied. You've taught at the London Nautical School for Boys, which sounds incredibly posh, but it was an inner city school in London, and you introduced some really radical ideas there. Coming back to New Zealand, you've been the head of English at Mount Aspiring School in Wanaka, which for those who are new to New Zealand, it has a real outdoor focus. It's in a beautiful environment. And now you are, in fact, the head of department for English in New Zealand's absolutely most knobbiest school, Christ College here in Christchurch. So it's been quite a journey for you. In 2020, you won the National Excellence in Teaching Award, and you are much loved amongst your peers. Of course, you've got a podcast, and I love this. It's called Is This for Credits? Which teachers and parents will understand that question. When we first met you, it was when you were working at Les Mills as a group fitness manager. So really quite a change for you in careers. And we'd love to talk to you today about what has driven you to make those decisions to move and what has shaped you into becoming what is a radical teacher in a relatively conservative profession. Tell us about that, and welcome.
Oh, well, hi, Sash. I'm very honoured by your introduction, and I think you do a better job than I do of introducing. You know how people ask you to introduce yourself in unfamiliar settings, and you have to be selective about what you share. And the things that I find most interesting about myself are generally not the things that are interesting to anyone else. So thanks. I'm gonna use that. Much appreciated. It's really cool to be talking to you, and I feel kind of warmed by our long history together. We have a common foundation in a way, and it's such a powerful thing and quite a sobering thing to look at the faces and hear the voices of two people who I worked with over 20 years ago, and that notion of our shared endeavour, about which we were quite optimistic in our earlier life, but now we're actually achieving some things, managing to make that little dent that we hoped to, and really, really happy to be talking to you about it. I find your question quite hard to answer easily. Like I don't want to. I know you can't. This format doesn't allow me to talk for 3 hours about what got me here.
Go on.
I hear that it's just excellent at editing, so I can tell you, and you can delete it all.
I can be even more specific. Tell me about the first one. When you were in fitness and you went, there's something more for me.
Yeah, I wasn't really the first one, but I'll go back a little bit further. I think one of the things is that growing up gay in a environment that's hostile about that, there are obviously disadvantages to that, but there are also advantages. And one of them is that you start to take quite a objective view of the society around you. You start to sort of disassociate from social norms, because if you acquire the social norms, then you just learn to loathe yourself, and that's not really healthy. So while that often happens, your way out of that is to reframe who you are in the world in ways that are more positive. And I got early practice at that because I was pretty roundly prejudiced against as a teenager and in schools, which is not coincidental. And so my early school experience was horrifying, but also powerful in terms of how it formed my choices in the future. So essentially, I developed a kind of an objective view about society early in life as a means of survival. And then it started to just be the norm for me to sit outside of what's happening around me and look at things from more of a kind of a moral framework. Because actually a quite interesting answer to being bullied or finding yourself in an environment that doesn't give you life is to think morally about it, is to understand what might motivate people to behave in the ways they do, and to be rational and understand that sometimes they're not motivated personally, but it's just their own norms or their fears or their anxieties being expressed. And if you start thinking in those abstract ways, it's a survival technique to start with. But they're also good skills, because if you want to work, critically inside environments, you have to sort of see those places quite well and understand them. So that might be the starting point.
Okay, so let me ask you a question about that though, because it seems to me that your experience through that is reasonably unique. And maybe not unique, but what we tend to hear more of is the people who don't develop that insight and way of coping with the hostile environment. And that's not to say that people are responsible for developing that, but you did. You were able to recognise early on that the prejudice and the conditions that you were experiencing weren't because there was something wrong with you. It was because there was something wrong with the system that you were in. And that in itself is a gift. It sounds like it didn't become an internalized, self-loathing for you. It became some clarity that the error was outside of you and not within you. How do you explain that?
No, I think it's just the two. I think the three of us are just now talking as, well, I'm the one in my 50s, but you're not far away, you think. So in retrospect, I see it. I understand it that way. I first of all had to clear out of the way all the self-loathing that I was taught.
Okay, right,
That all was in place at the time. But there are things I kept, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I can understand how immune I am to the kind of restrictions that other people impose on themselves, because I realized that I had early experience in that. And, a lot of people don't survive their teenagehood who were in my situation. I feel like I was lucky to survive it, to be honest. And it was the impact of a few key people at that time that probably achieved that. So those are extremely formative experiences, and they've literally driven me for the rest of my life as well.
Yeah.
So then I went into student radio, and I worked in that for almost a decade. So I've got this real affinity for microphones. And so started with big ones and student radio stations, and then moved to smaller ones and group fitness, and then just ended up with my own voice in a classroom. So in a way, I think my ego has been the thing that I've needed to learn to manage as I've progressed through life, wanting to make a difference. I feel like I wanted initially to really amplify my point of view. I was trying to get as many people as possible to listen to me. And then as time passed, I realized that the most impact that I can have with the things I have to offer are more interpersonal. So the actual in-person relationships have become the priority for me now.
I remember doing your classes back when you were a fitness instructor, when you're on the little mic, the headset mic.
The Madonna microphone stage, yes.
The best stage, some would say.
I still have that microphone.
That's correct.
It's there in case it's needed,
It's a costume now.
That's right. Unfortunately, just no one's asked.
Making a note now, so that's good.
Yeah, I thought of wearing it today, actually.
But I recall even like when you were teaching your cycle classes, and I used to come to those classes, there was something about the way that you taught the tracks. Like you were the only one I remember that told stories and took people on this journey. And I think it was even before, I mean, we were really teaching scripting. You were doing scripting, and it felt like you were doing that. And so it does seem like, even though it may have been a jump from those that you've taken all of that through, there's a natural trait in the way that you communicate.
I think my recollection of that time is just existing during those classes in a state of unalloyed happiness. Like, I just enjoyed it so much, and I was happy to be with those people, and I felt free to express it. And I think the other thing is that, for example, when your motives for affection are against the law, and then that changes, New Zealand society changed quite significantly through the years we're talking about, and suddenly I'm embraced for who I am by the society around me. There's something quite intoxicating about that. There's something quite powerful about being able to show you love something and just express it. And so I think I just got lots of opportunities to engage in the great pleasure of sharing that time with other people and feeling in the moment and accepted. And I think if you're experiencing it yourself, you can convey it. I've built this kind of, as you might have come across by having a listen to my endless talking online, I've got to focus on a couple of really foundational principles now. One of them is this notion of authenticity, which is thrown around a lot for obvious reasons, but it certainly means a lot to me as a motive for action. I want to create authentic experiences wherever I am working with other people. And authentic has to be something that's negotiated between you and the other people. I can't define that for them, but I do think that the pursuit of something authentic is a really worthwhile pursuit if you're going to want to really have a meaningful impact on others. And that means learning quite a lot about them and understanding them quite well, and understanding what has meaning to them. And the other thing is about sort of ceding control. I think that, I quite liked to talk about my career as I did in terms of larger to smaller to no microphone, because I feel like initially I was trying to influence the world by force and by amplification and by coercion, and that I've learned over the years how to influence the world more by getting alongside people and joining them where they are and adding something to what they're trying to achieve, rather than having to be the one that defines all that. I still have my own ground that I stand on, but so do they. So that's respected a lot more in my life. But I haven't even come close to your question yet, Sasha. So
yeah, well, but let me challenge you on that point.
Oh, good.
Because I think one of the reasons that it's possible to be small microphone now is there's more inherent power in the positions that you hold. Right. So the great paradox is the less you feel like you have to be shouty and the more you can be influential in a small way, you're actually in much more powerful positions now than you were back when you were. And that's the impatience of youth, which is, I have these things, right? Do you think?
Maybe true, but I don't know if I agree. I think my whole career has been a series of horizontal translations. I worked as general manager of a RDU, the student radio station in Christchurch. I ran the company. It was a reasonably big operation financially for my age of, starting at 21. I had a number of staff and a huge number of volunteers who I was responsible for. Moved from that to, group fitness manager, middle manager, Les Mills during the late 90s, early 2000s, and then moved to middle management in schools and have never gone beyond middle management in the last 20 years of education. So I don't actually think I inhabit a particularly different place. I just think I inhabit it differently.
Perhaps. I think there's a whole lot of people that go, you are the head of department at one of New Zealand's most prestigious schools. I think we're saying the same thing, but I also think that you do have enormous influence now. Your influence extends far beyond just the students that are in your classroom, because people are more interested in your ideas now.
Yeah, that's probably true. If I'm honest with you, I think the main place where I have an influence is still my classroom.
Yeah, okay.
I think it's still, the boys now that I see for 4 or 5 hours a week for a year at least, and how we build that ongoing relationship with each other and what that does in terms of setting them on a particular path in life. I think that's profound.
That's the ripples, right?
Yeah.
That you can, one of the things that you've challenged me about, which I've so appreciated, is that this podcast that people are listening to now, it's so heteronormative. It's so, tell us a story about your kids. And you were like, I just had to stop listening because there was nothing in it for me as a gay man. You guys are just so boring, right? But what I particularly understand from what you're talking about with your influence with those students in the classroom is I've often reflected from a feminist perspective that it might be the single biggest influence I have is through the 2 or 3 children that live at my house. Yeah. And that might be the single biggest thing I do, not in terms of, what society might see as huge, because the influence that you are having on those young men is ginormous. Yeah. In terms of what they might go on to do and who they might go on to be.
I really do think that if I did a little bit of a tour of the south of the North Island, doing some workshops for the Association for English Teachers just recently, and had a nice time doing kind of day-long workshops, looking at an aspect of English teaching with them. And I tried to share as much as I could of what I thought was of value, but they all just go back home to their lives afterwards.
And do exactly what they've always done, maybe.
Probably. And not I don't criticize that they're exposed to some new ways of thinking. They can take it or leave it. But I can't see how I could do something profound via that mechanism. To be honest, it might feel profound at the moment in time, but the chances of that having much residual effect seems quite small to me, feels quite small to me. So then I got back from that, and a 16-year-old boy Hugo, who I worked with as part of a triathlon club that I had when I was working at Mount Aspiring College, and he started off in year 7 and he gradually grew up through that club. He got in touch with me, he's now 16, because he was in Christchurch on his way to Europe because he's going to be riding with a European cycling club for the summer, and he just wanted to go for a ride with me. And I went for this ride with this young man, and I was literally in tears talking to him because I'm so proud of who he is. But also he sought me out and wanted to have this conversation because he also wants to show me who he is now. And that conversation with people, the fact that they're so proud of who they've become and they can see the role I played kind of supporting that's much more substantial in my view. And I think we're all like this. I think about what we do in group. I say we in group fitness as if I work in group fitness. I've written it down, Chris.
As if we exercise.
In our time in group fitness or the gym industry, we know that there are lots of opportunities to have that meaningful relationship with people, and that it's longitudinal. But I always think about, and I wish I knew her name. I never knew her name. But in the late 80s, Les Mills Dunedin had a receptionist who was legendary, and she made every individual who walked through that door feel as if they were a unique and special individual. And at that time in my life, I didn't feel good about myself at all. And that one point of contact every day where she made me feel like a human being and welcome was one of the things that changed my life. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that you have to be a classroom teacher, for example, to have this kind of impact, but I do think it's in the granular side of things. It's in the everyday that you make a difference.
We'll be right back.
If there was one skill that could double your income, advance your career, and increase your ability to influence, it is the skill of presenting. Whether it's on stage, in the boardroom, or at a job interview, the 30-minute presenter program will help take you to the next level. So check out our Instagram page, click the link in the bio, and get started on the 30-minute presenter program.
Well, I think what you're saying is true. I think it's incredibly powerful. I love hearing it. And it really upsets me, Anish, because we are people who stand on the stage and make a difference in one 40-minute talk. Are you saying what we do doesn't matter?
Oh, no, I definitely love what you do. The thing is that you also give people an experience. And another thing I think we do in education and in fitness and in any kind of area where we're working with others is that sometimes people need to experience something to believe it's possible.
Yeah.
And you can actually do that in a 40-minute session. You can take them to a place, even if just conceptually, and have them emotionally connect with something that you're saying or sharing or promoting. And they take that away as a form of belief, as an artifact, and that's definitely going to change people's lives. I'm not saying it doesn't. I just have a different take on it.
I love what you're saying. Can I ask you, tell us about how you came to what I see as a pretty radical shift in your approach to education. Did it start at the London Nautical School? And I'm talking about the idea that students could choose their teachers. Tell us about that.
I've said enough, actually, for it to make sense. It actually started out when I was working as HOD at Mount Aspiring College. But the precursors are the things that mattered. I always treated the students in my English classroom when I was an early stage teacher as I treat the participants in a group fitness class. I'd assume that they had the choice and they chose to be here, and I had to offer value for that time. I had to understand why they made that choice, and I had to deliver the thing they were asking for. And I just treated my students that way. I know they're actually in prison and they don't have any choice, but I decided to create a conceit that it was a choice. And then taking that disposition towards students made a big difference in terms of how we related to each other. But then I started thinking, why not just offer a choice? And of course, there's I've been a group fitness manager. I knew how to run a timetable that involved, your participants or students having a choice. And I knew what power that had in relation to working with a high performance team, that if you are to some extent measured by, and I don't mean this in a cruel way, but just a realistic way, the kind of number of people that choose to come to your class, then that makes you, by virtue of the practicality of it, it makes you focus on the customer. And so in education, that's completely anathema. So the hardest thing about that was to convince teachers that there was something good in making themselves vulnerable in that way and allowing themselves to be subject to the choice of students. But the payback was that they could teach in ways and across material that they saw value in. And so it was driven by prior experience for me. But further back, the other prior experience that drove it was just how persecuted I was at secondary school. Like one teacher in year 10, fourth form, used to routinely address me as faggot. That would be what he would call me in a classroom. If I had had the choice to not be in that room, I'd have taken it. And I always think about the people who are not being served by the environment as much as the ones who will be. And in a school environment, offering those choices allows students to find the people with whom they have some affinity or protect themselves from harm, if I'm honest. And I feel I still owe that to the system, that creating mechanisms for that. So yeah, that was the thinking that sat behind it. And I used my cultural capital in Mount Aspiring College as an enthusiastic young teacher with new ideas to experiment with that, and it worked. So essentially, we've been replicating this in mine, where I've had the control to do so ever since. So thanks very much, Les Mills.
Like, it's mind-blowing, and I want to make sure that people really understand what it is. It's that you stand in front of the kids how old are they when they're making these choices?
Well, depending on the school, generally speaking, it's all the way through. So they literally could be the 12 or 13-year-olds starting out, but right through.
So 12 and 13-year-olds, and there's a great documentary that's made about this, an Al Jazeera documentary, and we'll post it so that people can see it because it's just fascinating to watch. But they come in at the start of the year. I mean, you tell it. They come in and what happens? Yeah,
so the students arrive at the beginning of the year and the teachers present to them the courses that they've devised as a pitch. And then the students are given some time to engage and discuss and find out more about those courses. And then they just select the course that they believe will serve them best for the year. And what tends to happen is that they obviously choose on the basis of three main motives. One might be who else is in it, and especially the younger students, well, it's often an important part of the decision, and they learn from that, often to avoid the people they want to be with, if that makes sense. And that's a good thing for a young person to learn and have choice over, learn from experience. And then another reason might be the content, and there's a good kind of third that are just focused on what kind of material they're going to learn about. And then there's a third for whom this is really important, and that is the character of the teacher who's going to teach them, and that relationship that they may or may not want to have. And so they get to select on that basis, and it takes the power away from us as educators, that really damaging thing of predetermining students' capacity by saying, you're a top student and you're a bottom student. I refuse to use that phrase in relation to human beings. And I also refuse to use this notion of ability as if it were predetermined. That's the whole Carol Dweck thing, but it's still so prevalent in education. This person is a high ability student. And I'm happy to talk about a high achiever because they have some control over that part of things. But
well, I think in the documentary you referred to it as you will all sit the GCSEs, which is obviously the UK equivalent of NCEA.
Yeah.
But the path you take to get there will be completely different and tailored to you all. And so they choose their teacher, they're basically choosing their experience, but then that outcome, you were putting that line in the sand. But as someone who went through a schooling system who was completely failed by a schooling system, and I hated school,
you mean the system failed you, my friend?
The system, failed me. When I was listening to it and watching it, I was like, man, that would have made such a difference, because as a parent with my kids, I've seen the difference that the teacher makes, that you get the right teacher and it's game changer. They might have been struggling for half the year and suddenly the teacher changes and then they're away, or vice versa. And
it's just relationships, right? These young people have to spend time in a room that's essentially dominated by that person. And if they can't relate to that person, it's torture. But if they can relate to that person, then that person provides them with what they need. And obviously different people need different things. So it's not like you want everybody to be the same. You don't have these massive populists. You just make sure you have a diverse workforce so that there is diverse options available to the kids. But I also wanted to kind of affirm or assert one thing. This is kind of educational, so it doesn't necessarily need to go in, but we don't get the kids to choose what we teach. We choose that, because that's our expertise. It's like if you at Les Mills got the participants to say in body attack classes, I used to teach body attack, as you know, and everybody just wants to do the kick track. And then if you let them decide how it was structured, then you just have 7 kick tracks and a quick cool down. You know what I mean? And there are things that students are not expert at, and there are things that are our professional expertise, and that is actually developing learning programs around the curriculum. That's our business, and we do that work. And we focus on that, and then let the students choose the things that they are expert at, which is things like the kind of people that they relate well to, which we have got no idea about anyway. It's not even our business, to be honest.
What I love about this idea, and why as soon as you told me about it when I visited with you in London, and it blew my mind, because it's so subversive, but it's actually both a left-wing and a right-wing idea.
Yes.
And that's what makes it beautiful, because a left-wing, more sort of socialist view of education is around every learner having different needs, and we're not just going to rote learn and stick everybody in the same box. So let's be respectful and elevate the status of our students. How it plays into a right-wing kind of more education as business performance ideal is
the choice.
If nobody picks you, that's some pretty strong feedback about how effective you are as a teacher.
Yeah, I think the reason it works out like that is that it actually is about the students rather than being about the teachers. All institutions start to become about the people that run them. And even though they might claim to be customer focused, sometimes the infrastructure actually is supporting a focus that's more actually about the needs of the people working in there, or what they think their needs are. Because the other thing is, this is really life-giving for teachers. For the first time in their entire careers, they're standing in front of groups of students who want to be there. Can you imagine?
We often talk about the keynotes or the speeches that we give when people have to be there.
Yeah.
And compared to the audience that chooses to be there.
Well, that is the life of an English teacher. I mean, you are essentially teaching in a prison.
Yeah.
So you've got to do some work on that to some extent. But you can see that some of the underlying motives are to do with the humanist approach to things, which are driven by my prior experience of life. And I don't pretend otherwise. You asked about how to implement these things that are new. And to be honest, I'm in my 50s. I've only ever moved horizontally. I think I've been fairly spectacularly unsuccessful at selling this to my colleagues outside of my direct crew. So fine, I've got this great thriving English department within a much larger institution, but many times that's essentially exploded in the end. And it's exploded largely due to my inability to operate the politics of the institution so that it doesn't turn against what we're doing, which is countercultural and challenging to a lot of people's norms. And that's been a big and long lesson to learn. And that's actually been to do with the fact that I've always characterized myself in my self-regard as an outsider. It's my most comfortable place. And I've just literally recreated it over and over again. So this time around, I put myself in the center of the conservative educational world. And this time I insist that I am going to focus more on establishing strong and constructive, positive, honest relationships with the whole institution and not just focus on achieving this kind of objective within it. So I've got to work within the system. If I want to be a middle manager, I have to remember the word middle. And there are other people in the organizations whose needs matter. And so that's my goal, is to learn how to do a better job of setting these things up in a way where they don't end up being rejected by the institution.
Yeah, I'm just thinking Ish is such a TV fiend, and we've got Malcolm in the middle. Everybody hates Chris.
Exactly.
That's the challenge.
Yeah, that's right. And there's something else. There needs to be a complete alternative to that, I think. By the way, your TV-ish, it's great. You know lots, but it's all American. Seriously. Do you only watch American television? Even as a child, no British stuff shows up. It's same with music. I don't understand.
I know. Well, the British is there, IT crowd, Black Hat, all that stuff. But
right.
Oh, we've got such a young listener base, but I need to expand it. Okay. Next review I talk about is going to have a British backbone,
especially the nostalgia stuff. Just for me, I'm just asking for a bit more relevance.
We might get you back as a listener to me.
We'll try and woo Chris back. At least listen to this episode.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the things that resonated with me today was the interview, and I hope I'm going to say this right, with
Irana. Yep.
Irana. And he said something that I had just never really clocked before, but he said most people get into teaching because they had a really positive experience with the way that they were taught and with the school structure and their experience. And so it's the few that get into teaching because they actually want to fix something. Because if the majority are kind of, well, I loved it. I loved the way that I was taught. I loved my experience through school, so I'm going to come in and, kind of replicate it and do the same. Is that one of the reasons why you decided to go down the teaching route, was you wanted to take your experience and mix things up and change it?
Yeah, I think it's just been a 20-year therapy session for me, to be honest. But you're absolutely right. But I think his point was valid. And I think it applies in fitness as well. You know, how many times have you ended up with a personal trainer or a group fitness instructor who's new to that work, who think that everybody's going to respond to it like they do to the kind of stimulus that they offer. And so they're basing all their judgments on their own experience. And their own experience is not actually representative of a lot of the people they're actually working with. And so that's just a naivety, I think. But it's quite an interesting thing, just like in fitness and education. You have to strike that balance between finding ways to make things relevant and giving people a sense of their value, and remembering that you've actually got something they need to learn in order to thrive in the society. There are things that they have to become good at in order to be able to feel confident and engage with the world around them. And it's our job to make sure they leave with those things. You know, I think we'd do a better job with you now-ish than was done in your time. I think there's been progress made in education. I would hope that would allow your strengths to be identified, but also concrete and specifically knowledgeable support, so that every experience in the classroom wasn't just a hostile one for you.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things with Arana is the whole, like, his writing is incredible.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, how many times have we lost students who have never pursued a passion or never pursued anything because they just didn't like it? And Sasha's, she's always going on about this philosophy that women are equal.
Is this a new
crazy
concept?
talk.
Yes.
I know, it's just crazy. But actually, the thing that keeps resonating with me is not the fact that, we need to make it equality and that's great from now on, but also how many women never got a voice and never got a position and never got to grow their potential because they were just shut down, or whether they were gay or of colour or whatever it was. That's the stuff that messes with my head, is how much of history could have been so different, or how many more works of art or books or things could have come out. But at least now, like you said, a schooling system that is evolving and learning with people like yourself that are mixing it up and changing it is, it's powerful.
Well, that's where the fitness industry often steps in, doesn't it? You often see it picking up on people who were kind of discarded by the education system. And the fitness industry sees other things in them and helps them to develop into quite significant human beings who have their own sphere of influence. So it isn't just education's job; it's our job as a society to look after each other and to find ways to support each other to grow. And education can only do so much of that. I'm still quite traditional in the sense that you're also going to school not just to learn about who you can be, but also just to learn some functional skills. Reading and writing, complex thinking, rational organization of ideas, critical evaluation of situations and people and language, just so that you can function and then find yourself. So that we're all on this fairly level starting point and can communicate. And so in spite of all of his barriers, which in Irana's case were related to racism, he clearly acquired an education while he was at it. And he's now able to use those things to challenge some of the things that were wrong in his learning. And that's, I think, quite a good thing. The education failed him, but it didn't fail completely.
Yeah, I'm just far more cynical than you guys, sorry. And that's partly based on the experience that I see that children are still having out there. And, I've said before, is it too much to ask that I could just get teachers that love my kids, just as a baseline, just to love them and to see them in the fullness of their potential, not in the smallness of how they present on any given day, because their brains are just still developing and they might behave in ways that are entirely appropriate with a hormonal overload, but that create challenges, to see what's possible in them and spark that in them. And
totally agree with you, but I don't think there are many people like me who had as much kind of preloaded experience, or people like me with the kind of perhaps capacity for growth professionally that are going to want to go through everything they have to go through to be teaching. I mean, I think education, I'll speak really arrogantly sort of to match your cynicism and say that I had to have that really profound formative experience to want to bother with education. And I think education's lucky I did, but I think we've got a problem in the way that we value it. I think the job is so much harder than you're rewarded or acknowledged for. And for a great deal of people, they're just going to look at that and go, don't be stupid. I could do that. Yeah. So I could do that. I could put that much passion into something else and either be rich or be rewarded, or at least not have to deal with this bullshit. Sorry to swear. So if you want it to change, Sasha, got to invest in it.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree. We're on the same page about that, right?
I mean, that's one of the reasons that I like this language that I'm using now, and the way that I'm framing things right now is why I got the backs up of my colleagues, because I see it from the inside. But I see the same things you're talking about, and I don't find it acceptable either. I don't find it acceptable in any domain. I'm just as happy to be unhappy with someone who is mean to me when I get on a bus and is driving it. Everyone needs to do the thing they do as well as they can.
Say that again, because I love it.
I love that.
What? That everyone has to do the thing they do as well as they can.
Yeah.
That's a moral obligation that we have, isn't it?
Yeah,
like we're really lucky in this society. We often do get to choose what we do. Our only responsibility is to do it as well as we can.
And I mean, I'm a raging sort of socialist, communist. I'm not sure I know what the words mean, but what I mean is we should just pay more people more for what they do that actually creates value in our society, and we pay people our system rewards people unfairly for dumb stuff. And so I love reading the stories of the cleaners who are incredibly passionate about the loos that they clean, and it gives them meaning because they are coming from a spirit of service. And I'm like, that's a person that deserves a lot of money.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And as a business person, you will no doubt find ways to achieve that in your business in order to get the kind of result that you're looking for. But I don't think that you just pay people more. I think you also find ways to shift the culture so that that sort of striving for excellence and that uncompromising zeal towards making sure that things are as good as they can be are actually supported in the institutions, as opposed to being things that lead to people being removed or needing to move. You know what I mean? And that's, that's quite a hard thing when you're thinking at a system level. How do you change a system? And actually, the two of you are so high-powered now that you're both in charge of quite complex systems. How do you change a system so that the culture actually encourages and supports? Because my work with volunteers tells me that it's not just money. You don't just pay money to get that. People have to feel valued, and they have to feel as if those aspects of them are seen and acknowledged. And I don't pay my students either, but I can get quite a lot out of them once they start feeling they're being acknowledged.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Yeah. Such a great point.
I love that mindset as well around, just doing what you do and just doing it to the best of your ability as a way to progression within business. I think so often some people just go, well, if that's what they're going to pay me, this is as much work as I'm going to give them.
Yeah, you're right. It's both sides though, isn't it? You do that for so long, but then someone has to notice.
That's right.
Or you're going to take that somewhere else, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because you can't just endlessly do a wonderful job and not be noticed for it. Because, I think we're all essentially about attention. Obviously, I'm excessively about attention, and to some extent, so are you two. And therefore, we manufacture our own environments in order to get the audiences we need. But I think every human being needs some kind of observation and acknowledgement for who they are and the things they do. And I think if you want to shift people into a more positively motivated state, then you just be really careful about what you pay attention to. If you give attention to the things you're looking for, then they're likely to start to amplify those aspects of what they do. And that happens in a classroom. That's why you don't need to use punishment. You just focus on the things you're looking for, and everybody starts like a magnet moving towards that thing. You can do that with all human beings, I think.
I think we should just take all your sound bites and start a t-shirt business.
Oh my goodness. That's a nice insult. Thank you.
You're just slogans, man. You're just slogans. I love what you're saying about, because my fundamental belief is that not so much that we long for attention, but it's that we crave and desire to be seen and understood. And that's a form of attention, that we are seen for who we are and respected and acknowledged, and that other people delight in us when we are expressing ourselves in the fullness of who we are.
I would say it's the same thing. I think I'm being a little bit more behaviorist about it, but I think it's the same thing.
Yeah, that I see you for who you are, and I love that about you, and let's keep doing that thing together.
That's my day. I just spend my day with groups of boys walking to my classroom, and that's what I say, and then they leave. And it's just like coming to those RPM classes that you're talking about, Ish. People come into the room, I tell them I love them, and I mean it, and they leave.
Do you feel like Robin Williams in like Dead Poets Society? Are there moments like that?
Well, within education, that's seen as quite a toxic trope, because it's not meant to be about that person. It's meant to be about the students. Like those films are sort of set up around this concept of this inspirational individual on whom the students are dependent in order to achieve the successes that they have. So hopefully not, but, egos like ours, no doubt I do that sometimes. No doubt I succumb to that. But you don't want to use kids for that. You don't want to use young people to prop up your own ego and create an identity for yourself that they feel dependent on, because that's not serving them. It's not helping them for their future. It's making them feel as if they achieve what they achieve because of you, and that doesn't help them, I don't think, at all.
There's plenty of those, I think Michelle Pfeiffer is in those white saviour films where...
Oh, yeah. They're not good.
Yeah, and I think it's such a tough position to be in, because there are so many people who, not just teaching, but in all kinds of careers, who go, I want to help. My motivation is to help. And so I'm going to go and work in this community, and my needs inadvertently going to be met from, helping them. I remember every now and again I see people wearing, Save the Children T-shirts. And I always think it should say save the children from me, because the person's having their own needs met. So it's getting that balance between still wanting to serve and be useful in communities of need.
Yeah, and that's why I try and put forward at the beginning of any conversation the kind of psychological underpinnings for what I do, because I need to check that all the time so that when I'm actually in a classroom with young people, I'm not being driven by those motives in my work with them and just focusing on them. I think about shifting your attention to the other person is, for me anyway, is a big part of it. Is just paying attention, listening more, being more aware of them, thinking about what their needs are, understanding their needs, using my experience to meet their needs. I think that applies to whatever domain we're in, to be honest. And that supplants that otherwise quite unhelpful imposition of needing to be in that role in order to meet your own needs. Mm. It's interesting though, isn't it? Like some of the criticisms that I made of your podcast, which were
this one that we're listening to right now.
This podcast that I'm now talking on. Oh, that was quite a successful criticism, actually. But that's more to do with just my own needs. Like I have this really strong need, and you're talking about being seen and appreciated for who you are. But one of the things that I think we, in positions where we are working with groups of people or holding groups of people, need to remember to do is to think about representation.
100%.
And the fact that we can't provide that entirely for ourselves because we're in particular groups means that we have to kind of be aware of the possible impacts of the way that we see the world and the way that affects the way we articulate and make decisions, and put some stops in and allow other people to step into that space. There was that quite famous book by Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In. And I know she's no longer, anybody's person, but at the same time, I always think that one of the things that as a cisgendered white male that I need to do is just lean out. I just need to get out of the conversation sometimes. And you can see clearly how hard I find that.
Yeah.
But it's also part of it, isn't it? And so I do sometimes listen to national radio, and I listen to you, and I listen to a few other people, and I really like where everyone's coming from, and they're all right on, but that's so heterosexual for me, and I just feel like I'm diminishing sometimes, because all the bits between the meaningful conversation are that kind of social interaction feels really excluding, just because it doesn't acknowledge my reality. I mean, 50-something-year-old white gay guy in a relationship with another man, secondary school teacher, pretty middle class credentials, but I don't have kids. And that not having kids thing is actually quite significant in your life.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that I think everyone should pretend they don't have kids as well. It's just creating a bit of space.
I mean, I've thought long and hard about, the feedback that you gave. And what's fantastic about it is I don't feel criticised by it. I recognise it for what it is and go, so how do we fix that? While acknowledging you can't be all things to all people all of the time, and our shared reality is our shared reality. But I've been reflecting on how often I get asked to speak at things, and if it's a panel, I make sure there's other women on it. I ask if there's people of other ethnicities on it, and I've just started saying, not just no, I won't speak, but I'm starting to build up like a Rolodeck of people whose voices don't get amplified, and let's just have they can do that. Yeah. And it's not a dismissive, they can do it, I'm too busy. It's actually your audience is going to benefit from hearing from someone else in a different perspective on this. And
I know I said to you, but I'd like to repeat the fact that when someone goes to the trouble of thinking about what it might be like for me to listen to what they're producing, they have my undying loyalty for the rest of their lives. Like, you only have to do it once, and I suddenly feel, oh my goodness, someone actually went to the trouble of thinking about what it might be like to be me and considered that when they actually presented what they were doing. And that little chink of light that says, here you are, you matter and are important and are observed, trying to think about the language you were using before, Sasha. And I think when you're in these big public facing positions, it's actually quite easy to do, because you can just do it deliberately. You can just make the decision, I'm going to make sure that I acknowledge that group or that group's perspective when I talk about this thing, while I'm also sharing my own perspective. It's not to the exclusion of how you see the world.
Well, I would give you a really, what's a tiny example of this as it plays out in the world that was actually incredibly moving and powerful for me in ways that I hadn't anticipated. And that is, and because it's been a while since I've mentioned it, but at Harvard Business School.
It's like where.
Sorry, it's been a while. It's been like 10 minutes, people.
I know. I like this is where, just so everyone knows, if this stays in, we're actually 52 minutes into this recording. That's
I know, how long?
almost an hour.
Woo! And everything about that operation is slick, man. They are great. And so you arrive on campus, you move around, and then in the lecture theatre, I went to the loo. And pretty sure they'd not gender-neutral bathrooms yet. They have male and female bathrooms. You go into the women's bathroom and there's just shelves stacked full of sanitary products.
Right.
Not just like, oh, there's a $2 tampon machine.
Yeah.
The shelves that are like, it's a Willy Wonka's of products, and they're just there for free.
Yeah.
And you just grab them. And I just had this moment of,
like, I'd be in tears
I
about
was.
that. Yeah.
My eyes just watered up. I'm like, oh, you get that, you know, we're traveling, we might get stuck, and what a gift that was.
Yes. But also so straightforward, really, you know, and I mean, just making that little move, like there are so many ways to do it, and gestures do matter. Like a gesture like that signals a whole set of thought processes that make people like me, for example, who often consider themselves in an outsider's position, suddenly feel welcome. And that sense of welcome is, for me, quite hard to achieve. I'll give some fun examples. Ivan, my partner, and I were thinking about coming back from London a few years ago, and so we took an advance visit to New Zealand and travelled around. The sorts of things that we would experience on a routine basis that I think it's important that I talk about, because I guess people don't think about it, is we might walk into a restaurant, the pair of us. What will happen is you'll get this really bright-eyed, awesome concierge, and they'll say to you, "Table for 4?" and then I think, do I actually want to remain in this restaurant? Because I'm going to have to come out to you, and then I'm going to have to explain it's just the two of us, and then, do you know what I mean? Like, or do I actually just wanted a meal, but now this is political, and that sort of stuff is absolutely not about people trying to communicate a negative prejudice. They just don't think about anything outside their own experience. And they think by anticipating based on what they observe that they're doing you a favor. They're thinking, but actually I think it's sometimes better just to sit back and listen. And anyway, imagine seeing me and Ivan and imagining, I mean, what would our wives look like?
Well, you're in like Tekapo or Temuka or a tiny town somewhere.
Dunedin.
Yeah, there we go.
My hometown. But,
that's classic. We have to draw to a close, because that's how kind of time works, and you know that I could speak to you for for hours, and what I love about the three of us having this conversation is on two levels. Well, one is to just hear you share these philosophies that we can just hear are so powerful for our young people. And if you get to impart them to other teachers and colleagues, pick up a fraction of that approach rubs off, how powerful that is, but also how affirming it is for Ish to hear so clearly that the system failed him, not that he failed within the system, and that even as we age, those things stay with us, and it's just great to be reminded of that on a regular basis, you know, that we survive and thrive despite what happens to us, and how great if we can set up education systems that don't set people back. And that snort was free. You can don't edit that snort out. That's a powerful emotional snort in there, right?
The thing, though, is it shouldn't have failed you. And I also feel like while you have made a lot of yourself in response to some of those early experiences, you shouldn't have had to. And there could have been much easier things for you to have as obstacles in order to learn about who you are as a man. Does that make sense? It shouldn't be our education system that does that to you.
Thank you for that. And also just thank you for just being you. I mean, I grew up in a traditional Christian home, and the fitness industry absolutely changed my perspective and my life. And it was meeting people like you and Richard Betty and just really great gay guys that were cool to hang around and were friendly and fun. And I've been able to connect with and build relationships. And that's changed my whole perspective on the world. And meeting people like Sasha who have just changed my view, because I think if I hadn't got into fitness, I hadn't met people like yourself, I'm not sure I kind of would have got into something that I wasn't that passionate about, and who knows, but it's been experiences through schooling, as you said, that I've kind of changed and adapted and learnt, but also meeting people like yourself that have just had huge impact with tiny interactions. So thanks for what you did and what you do and everything that you give.
I quite like my little process of compulsory homosexuality with the students. Like, until they tell me they're all gay.
Yeah.
So I always talk about their future boyfriends, etc., and their two fathers, until they tell me that they have heterosexual parents and that they are actually interested in women. And once they come to that conclusion, which might just be a phase, then I'll start using the right terms.
100%. They can come out to you as being straight if that's what they feel they need to do.
Yeah, but I don't need them to. I'm quite happy just to perceive them as gay until they decide that they want me to see them differently, and they really like that. So
I love it. The last thing that I want to share is a story that's not new to everybody, but it'll be new to some people. And I think it's one that really, for me, exemplifies what an extraordinary individual you are, and that was our famous story, that when I barely knew you and I was broken and destitute, I was pregnant and in a new relationship and trying to deal with the fact that the main thing I brought to that relationship was a whole lot of debt. I just said to you one day, I'm having these money troubles, and you were like, I can lend you some money.
Yeah. And
you just don't meet people every day that say, I can lend you some money.
That's interesting,
and we're not talking about an insignificant sum of money. I looked up like the inflation, and like in today's money, it's like $35,000. It's like, it's a lot of money, right? And you just said, I could do that. I don't want you to be troubled and worried about money. You'll pay me back. You're good for it. And dear listeners, I did. I paid you back. But that was a transformative act of kindness that enabled me to survive in a situation that I'd got myself into and was entirely my own fault. But your kindness helped me out of that. And it's not just the act of it. It's the intention of it and the philosophy of who you are. And I just want to honour you for that. Thank you.
Well, if I'd known how much that was going to repay me, I'd have given you double.
I might not have been able to pay double back.
I'm really moved by that. But, actually having a chance to do something that's obviously going to be of value to someone else is great. And I do think, one of the things for me through life is I've found it hard not to have kids. And when you have kids, you've got some people in your life that you can dedicate yourself to, and that you can defer every of your own need in order to be able to fulfill the needs of. And actually, I probably wasn't conscious at the time, but I was probably searching around for opportunities to do that. And so if you can't do it with kids, there's others around who have needs, aren't there?
Yeah.
And it is. I was perfectly happy for you to use the money, and you paid it all back. Well, it was never not going to happen.
Yeah, thank you.